Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are going to be talking about the Brooklyn Nets here. Specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Nets and Ben Simmons. So, yeah, it's that time to bring up the Simmons situation for Nets fans, really, whether they want it or not, because there was recently a little bit of a report coming out of Brooklyn, out of New York, that Ben Simmons is supposedly 100% healthy, that he's ready to play, that he didn't suffer any sort of setbacks in his rehab process in the offseason, and that he is sort of looking to take up that spot as the starting point guard for the Nets at the start of this upcoming season. So, well, I mean, we were kind of waiting for that update, waiting to see would Ben Simmons be sort of ready to go, at least from a health perspective, right? And now, at least in theory, we have our answer. Of course, if one were to be more pessimistic here, you could argue that we've kind of heard this story, that we've kind of seen this movie before, right? He obviously came on strong initially in Philadelphia after missing his rookie season, or what should have been his rookie season. He was looking as good as everyone sort of said that he would be, right? When he was drafted, before a mix of injuries and sort of mental and off the court issues brought his time in Philadelphia to about as dramatic an end as possible, right? So he ends up getting traded over to Brooklyn. And his first sort of stint with the Nets here, obviously he didn't leave the team, but we'll sort of divide the timeline in that fashion. His first stint with the Nets obviously had some similar problems, right? He misses pretty much an entire season with that same sort of mix of a little bit of injury, a little bit of sort of mental health, mental wellness issues. This time we mixed in a little bit of just sort of holding out in general as well. So he misses an entire season, and then last season he only plays about half of the games, right? He played 42 games last season before being sort of in and out of the lineup, and it is worth noting his numbers in those 42 games that he played regressed pretty significantly. If we take a look at his stat line, or most of his stats here, 6.9 points, 6.3 rebounds, 5.1 assists, and 1.3 steals per game, which unfortunately for Ben Simmons are all career lows. Uh, I think other than maybe his field goal percentage being a little bit higher, pretty much all of his stats across the board were the lowest of his career, which is not great. And, well, now he's coming back, but the last two seasons that we've seen from Ben Simmons were 42 games with career low numbers and 0 games because of injury, mental issues, and holding out, right? So the track record is not great. But at this point, the big question for Ben Simmons is not just his health. It's nice that the report says he's 100% healthy. That is a big deal for Simmons coming back. But perhaps just as important at this stage is where he is at mentally and where he's at in terms of his actual game. Right? If we go back to those stats, 6.9 points per game, single digit points per game is not ideal, right? Especially when you consider what we saw from him in the past, what we saw from him back when he was um, playing at, I guess, what we would call at the time his peak when he was in Philadelphia. However, there are still some positives here, right? The scoring output was very rough, but still averaged over 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and 1 steal per game. So if he could continue to do something like that, even if the scoring doesn't improve, those are still averages that could make an impact for the Nets, really, no matter what. Now, obviously, the best case scenario here is that Simmons just gets back into his old scoring ways. He goes back to averaging 14, 15 plus points per game. Uh, if that is the case, then the Nets are terrifying, right? Because then you have a backcourt duo of himself averaging double-digit points and threatening sort of triple-double numbers here and then. Plus, you have Mikal Bridges, who showed off the scoring ability last season and remains a pretty elite defender at the guard position as well. So that's the best case scenario. But even if that doesn't happen, even if Ben Simmons does not get back to that position as a scoring option, if he can maintain the rest of the stat line, if he can maintain the defense, if he can maintain the rebounding and assist numbers, then he still provides pretty incredible value for the Nets if he's healthy, right? If you watched the early offseason preview video that we did for the Nets, there'll be a link somewhere on your screen right now, hopefully. You would know, or if you're just a Nets fan in general, I suppose, that Ben Simmons potentially represents a solution to a lot of the Nets' problems from last season post Kevin Durant trade, right? It's important that we make that distinction because the team after the Kevin Durant trade was dramatically different from the one before it. So they had very different problems compared to that previous iteration, right? And two of the biggest needs that I sort of talked about for the Nets here were Bridges and the big men, right? So for Mikal Bridges, I mentioned that there might be concerns if he could both maintain the scoring output that we saw from him in his time with Brooklyn last season while also still remaining an elite level defender, right? The amount of effort that would need to be put in to be honestly an elite player on both ends to be a true two-way star is pretty significant. So then there were questions if Bridges was going to be able to do that because in the past he didn't necessarily have to do both at the same time when he was with the Suns. He focused a lot more defensively and occasionally had bursts of offensive production. With the Nets, he's going to have to do both. If Ben Simmons is playing anywhere close to the level that we saw him capable of previously, I think that becomes a lot easier, right? A Ben Simmons that's running the point, averaging 6 or more assists per game and creating opportunities for Mikal Bridges absolutely helps to facilitate that. And if Simmons is even a relatively competent defender, right, let alone the kind of guy that we saw in Philly who really could make a difference, then Bridges has less responsibility to shoulder on the defensive end as well. He is not going to be solely responsible for guarding the perimeter, for covering the opposing star guard. Maybe Simmons could, help him out every other possession or something of that nature. So if Ben Simmons is healthy and playing well, then he helps Bridges on both ends of the floor, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a one-man show here. On the other end of things, for the big men, I mentioned the Nets really did need some sort of defense and rebounding help down low, some way to help out Nick Claxton, and I guess we'll throw Royce O'Neal in there as well as sort of the other guy in that front court. But those two did a whole hell of a lot of rebounding. But I did point out no one else on the Nets did, or the guys who did were guys that got traded away like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Ben Simmons could potentially solve that problem as well. Last season, in just those 42 games, he averaged over 6 rebounds per game. So having that sort of hybrid guard forward who actually will contribute on the rebounding front will lighten the load for the Nets starting big men as well. In the same vein that we see for guys like, I guess Josh Hart is really kind of the best example here for the Knicks, a guy who plays that sort of hybrid 2-3 guard forward kind of position, and he gets in there, he fights for rebounds, and sure that takes some of the numbers away from your big men, right? Because every rebound that goes to a guard isn't going to a Royce O'Neal or Nick Claxton, but it also gives you a little bit of an edge because you have an extra guy fighting for rebounds compared to the other team, and we saw what that did for the Knicks, right? They made the playoffs, they got to the second round, Josh Hart was getting 4, 5, 6 rebounds a game, and that absolutely helps over the course of an entire game and an entire season. So if Ben Simmons could come back and do something like that, right? Average that sort of same number of rebounds, then it would make the Nets a little bit more rounded, right? You're not relying on just O'Neal and really just Claxton to go out and get you 12 rebounds a night for you to have any chance of winning your rebounding battle. So I guess the biggest point to be said with all of this is that I would like to lean more on the positive side for the Nets, right? Biggest takeaway for me is that I like what I see with the Nets right now, right? You're gonna have a full season of Mikal Bridges playing here as opposed to eh, just sort of the half or third of a season that we got to see from him last year with the trade that went down. So we'll get a full season with Bridges as the number one option for the Nets. Uh, Claxton and O'Neal still represent a pretty solid duo down low. Nick Claxton still obviously does most of the heavy lifting between that duo, but O'Neal is there. They also added a pretty intriguing rookie in Noah Clowney who could potentially sort of bolster them on the interior as well. I don't know about offensively, but at least defense and rebounding, he can help. You've got guys like Cameron Johnson, Lonnie Walker, who they added in free agency, and another rookie that they drafted in Derek Whitehead, who can all potentially sort of space the floor, hit some outside shots, right? Maybe add that sort of perimeter threat. And then you've got guys like Spencer Dinwiddie, guys like Cam Thomas, players who maybe haven't been the most consistent, but people that we know are capable of scoring in bunches, right? We know that Dinwiddie and Cam Thomas can go out there and get you 20 plus points, depending on the night, depending on the circumstances. So one of those two guys could present themselves as maybe the second or third option on offense behind Mikal Bridges. And if the consistency sort of comes into play for one or both of them, then that position could be solidified for them. So there are pieces that could fall into place here for the Nets. I'm not going to guarantee that every guy that I just listed will do the thing that I said they're capable of, but we at least know that they're capable of it. If you add a healthy Ben Simmons to all of this, Ben Simmons running the point, right? Being focused on facilitating those rebounding and assist numbers, sort of being the priority for him, and then maybe his scoring improves as well, then I think there's absolutely a reason to be optimistic here for Nets fans. With Ben Simmons, does this team jump into the top tier of contenders in the Eastern Conference? Almost certainly not, right? I don't think they're going to be making any sort of push into that sort of top three, top four, even if Simmons is healthy and playing for them. But they will absolutely be a fun team to watch. They will absolutely be a better team, I think, than they were last season because they kind of changed trajectory at the trade deadline with Durant leaving and then kind of coasted their way through to the sixth seed that they ended up in. So I think that they can do better. I think that they can be maybe a little bit more consistent this season, and I wouldn't be surprised if they find themselves at least in the range of play-in squads, potentially higher. Maybe they do get a playoff spot outright, but I think the Nets as currently constructed, plus Ben Simmons, is a team that absolutely could fall into that 7 to 10 range, especially considering the squads that were in that range last season. Teams like the Bulls, teams like the Raptors, they're still kind of in limbo. They're still not maybe 100% sure what's going down this season for themselves. So that uncertainty could absolutely give the Nets an opportunity to get in there and maybe steal a spot for them. But I mentioned the Nets early offseason preview video earlier when I was talking about what Ben Simmons can bring to the table. But if you watch that video, you also probably know I stated in that video, I think I have given up on Ben Simmons being, quote unquote, the guy for a team, right? The number one option, the face of a franchise kind of guy. I think that ship might have sailed by now. Between the injuries, between the mental health and the hiccups and the holding out, all of that stuff, I think those days are behind us where Ben Simmons can be the absolute number one option. But with the way that the Nets roster currently looks, he doesn't have to be the number one option. He does not have to be the face of the franchise. He can come in, he can be the team's starting point guard. He could, honestly, maybe even if he averages close or better to what he averaged in half a season last year, if he can average that over a whole season, maybe you get the Draymond Green treatment a little bit and you still end up in a sort of all-star bid kind of scenario, even though you don't score the most points in the world. So if he can do that, he can make a difference for the Nets, and he can make them undeniably a better team. If he is healthy, and if he's going to play in his role and if he is mentally prepared. But that's the caveat here. If he is healthy and he is mentally prepared to make his return and commit to the Nets for a full season, all the optimism that I just outlined will be relevant. However, if he's not, if he gets hurt again, if he's not mentally prepared, if he's not willing to accept maybe a lesser role playing second fiddle to Mikal Bridges, then this could all go up in flames again, right? And the Nets could spend a whole season desperately trying to dodge another round of Ben Simmons related drama, while a team that honestly has a whole lot to be positive about might just be trying to fight for their lives here, right? And then you'll have this a potential distraction of Ben Simmons coming in from your blind side to just smack you around a little bit. So, there's the rub. There's the other shoe dropping here. I talked a lot about what Ben Simmons could bring to the Nets and how helpful he could be, but all of it's dependent on him being healthy and him being 100% prepared mentally and him sort of bouncing back. And at this point, ask a 76ers fan about what it's like hoping that Ben Simmons will bounce back for an entire offseason and then looking at what the end result becomes. Or at this point, you don't even have to ask a 76ers fan. You could just ask a Nets fan from like last year, because all of that borders on that if, and it's a huge if, right? Because Ben Simmons has done this before. He has shown us the stats. He has flashed us the potential. He has looked amazing, and then it all just falls off of a cliff basically twice now. Once in Philly and once already in Brooklyn. So, if you're a Nets fan, I guess keep your fingers crossed, stay optimistic, but I sure as hell, wouldn't hold my breath, wouldn't put any money on Ben Simmons. It's just be hopeful, hope for the best, and but don't necessarily expect too much from Ben Simmons, because as I said, we've seen this before and it hasn't ended fantastically the first two times. But who knows? Maybe this time around it'll be different. But if I'm a Nets fan, if I'm the Nets organization, I am hoping for a positive outcome, but preparing for it not to be, if that makes sense, right? And I think that's the best that they can do. But yeah, that is that. Just wanted to sort of get that out here, because Ben Simmons to me is the perfect example of a guy who I'm not sure. I'm not really sure I would ever say that I want a player to fail, but a lot of the Ben Simmons stuff is wearing a little bit thin here in terms of most people's patience for it, right? So I would like for it to be over one way or another, right? Either come back healthy and ready to go, or we have a third flame out here, and then maybe the Ben Simmons experiment comes to an end. But a definitive answer one way or another would be very, very helpful here, for just fans in general and for the Nets in particular. So let me know what you think. Do you believe the report in terms of Ben Simmons being the starting point guard, not in terms of him being healthy? I don't really, there's nothing we can really do with that information. If they say he's healthy, we just have to kind of assume that they're telling the truth. But do you think he starts at the point guard position here for the Nets? Do you think he's going to be able to come back and mentally be the kind of guy that he was before? Do you think physically he actually does remain healthy over the course of a full season? And if all of that sort of plays out, just what kind of impact do you think Ben Simmons can have for this Nets team? Please feel free to let me know, because honestly, the opinions on Ben Simmons are wildly different depending on who you ask here. So please feel free to share your thoughts. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.